Hey everyone, Pastor George here with today's Bible study recap. And today in Bible study, we continued our series through the last week of Jesus' ministry. And today we looked at Matthew's recounting of the triumphal entry and the cleansing of the temple. So this takes place in Matthew 21, verses 1 through 17. And this is 5 days before the Passover. And we're all, I imagine, if you go to church, pretty familiar with both of these stories, especially the triumphal entry, because it's something we talk about every year, or at least make kind of a big deal about in a lot of churches, because we have Palm Sunday, which marks the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem. And it's something that, we grew up with since we're kids, most of us, and so we're very aware of Jesus riding in on a donkey into Jerusalem and Hosanna in the highest and all the other type of stuff. And these are both events, the cleansing of the temple and the triumphal entry, which are recorded in all of the Gospels. They happen in the same place in Matthew, Mark, and Luke. John puts the cleansing of the temple, or his recounting of a cleansing of a temple, earlier in Jesus' ministry, while Matthew, Mark, and Luke have their recounting in right here after he comes in. And there's all sorts of different interpretations. One that John moved it to make a theological point. Another time maybe that it's two events, or that John has a different chronology than the other ones. In any case, we're familiar with these events because they're told in all of the Gospels. But each of the Gospel writers focuses on something different. So I wanted to look at Matthew, because I'm trying to give equal representation to all the Gospels as we go through this week. But I want to look at Matthew because Matthew has some interesting characteristics that the other ones don't. For instance, Matthew, if you look at this text, you'll see quotes very extensively from the Old Testament, not even in what he is directly like what he has Jesus directly quoting from the Old Testament, but also in the details that he adds, right? So he adds this detail, which was picked up by several people in class, where it talks about how Jesus sits on them and there's confusion. Or is it the donkey and the colt that he's sitting on? Like, what's going on there, right? So he really harps on that idea that he's picking up from Zechariah, this idea of the colt and the donkey as being symbols of this messianic king that's coming in. I answered that. It's talking not about the donkey and colt, but about the clothes that they put on the donkey and the colt. At least that's what I think it's referring to. So all this is to say is Matthew actually does a really good job, if you read between the lines here, of drawing out the context of what's going on. So, for instance, you have the cloaks being spread on the road with the palms. That's something that happens for Jehu, who's a king that will dethrone Ahab and Jezebel and order Jezebel's execution. So he's seen as a king who is going against a corrupt and foreign regime. You could see why the people would make that connection to Jesus at this time, right? There's connections to what is said by Isaiah and Jeremiah when Jesus is in the temple, and he talks about, my house is supposed to be a house of prayer, but you've turned it into a den of robbers. He combines Isaiah and Jeremiah there. There's the donkey imagery, which is taken, Matthew quotes it from Zechariah 9:9, but in Zechariah 9:9 itself is referencing to this thing that happened with David and Solomon, where David has Solomon anointed as his heir and successor by Nathan and Zadok the priest, and he rides a donkey as a symbol, which is David's donkey. So you have this idea that there's this king who's coming into the city, and that he is going to overthrow these rulers. And so you can start to see why people would begin to be nervous about this. Now, interesting thing here is Jesus doesn't claim any of this for himself, right? These are things that, a lot of this is what people are doing around that, right? Jesus is definitely proclaiming himself to be the Messiah. There's no question about that. He even says in Matthew, at the end of what we read, right? He's talking about the worship of the Lord from the mouths of babes, and he's attributing that to himself. So he's taking on the Godhead, right? He's saying, I'm divine, right? This passage in Psalms is talking about worshiping me. And so he has a lot of big claims for himself. But there are a lot of people are interpreting this as political when that's not really what Jesus' intention is all, right? He's coming in to win a victory, but it's not a political victory. It's a victory over sin and death. And that becomes clear, obviously, as time moves on. So that's what happens 5 days before the Passover. So next week, we're going to look at the fourth day before the Passover. I hope this is interesting for you guys, and I will see you tomorrow for an episode of A New Thing. Peace out.